What is love? And why does it seem like life is defined by tragedy? We Live in Time from A24 is a beautiful love story following a couple meeting, having a family, and then battling cancer that tries to answer some of these questions. It balances life, love, and tragedy in a brilliant way to capture the essence of what life is. We Live in Time moves through time a lot. It takes you from the very highest points of a character's life to the very lowest. The first scene introduces us to Almut and Tobias about to have a child. Immediately afterwards, it cuts to Almut receiving her diagnosis of ovarian cancer. These two scenes take place years apart, and the film uses these time skips not only to pace the movie properly, but to help deliver its message. The characters' low points are followed abruptly by their highest moments, and vice versa. The journey of the pair falling in love is mirrored closely by the journey of them falling apart. This makes a great parallel to real life. Life is defined by the highs and lows. The things that make us who we are come up with how we face the tragedy that's inevitable to life, and how we hold the people who are closest to us. We Live in Time gives some fantastic insight into what people should do in the face of love and tragedy, and that's what I'm going to dig into in this video. The early tragedy comes with the first time skip. The movie goes from Almut contemplating if treatment is the right option for her.
More about quality than quantity.
I'm saying I'm not particularly interested in a treatment plan that accidentally wastes our time.
To Tobias living with his father and signing divorce papers. The viewer is intentionally misled by the film so that the emotional impact of the divorce is to a relationship that they've already seen. This gives it a little bit more impact when we see Tobias signing divorce papers. Then Tobias is hit by a car, and even when he wakes up in the emergency room with Almut sitting across from him, your first thought is that she must still be his emergency contact. Our belief is that the first two scenes in the movie set up their relationship and subsequent divorce. It isn't until Almut introduces herself that you realize that this is how they met, not how they left things. All of this sets up a tragedy that the audience can feel. We feel the loss of the relationship that we just got to know, while Tobias is feeling the loss of his divorce. In that way, we kind of live through the tragedy with Tobias, and we feel the same relief when he meets Almut. We're relieved knowing that the relationship we know is still intact, and Tobias is relieved not to be alone. This sets the stage for the fantastic personality of the characters that I'll address in a moment. First, I want to take a detour and talk about femininity. Almut's journey is defined by her decision as to whether or not to have children, and ultimately sacrificing her life to have a child.
I think I'm inclined to say that I would like to hang on to at least one of my addled, cancer-ridden ovaries.
It shows Almut, when faced with her first cancer diagnosis, that she has an option to either have a total hysterectomy or only do a partial one and risk a relapse, but still be able to have children afterwards. Then we experience Almut and Tobias having a child, and I mean, we literally see the childbirth. This, as cliche as it sounds, is the miracle of life. As we're able to explain things scientifically, we can understand how the atoms, molecules, and different cells interact. We kind of lose some of the mysticism of it, but that won't make it any less of a miracle that this is possible. That all of these tiny parts can work together to create a child is an absolutely unbelievable miracle that we definitely take for granted in our day-to-day lives. At its core, the creation of life is a spiritual connection with the divine feminine. The divine feminine is the creator of all life and the assurance that all life will be destroyed. It is the absolute unknown and unknowable. Almut decides to sacrifice a part of herself and risk her own life for the opportunity to create a life. Not only does she do what all parents do and sacrifice her individuality, but she risks her life and eventually dies because of this decision. Almut gave her life so that her daughter could live. This is the closest a human being could ever come to the spiritual world. Creating life is the most divine thing that a human being can do, and Almut leaves herself open to connect with the divine feminine to create life and is ultimately destroyed because of it. This movie does a fantastic job in setting up its characters. Almut and Tobias have so much personality, and it obviously helps that Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh have so much on-screen chemistry. The characters fight, they make mistakes, they lie to each other and say the wrong thing.
You for even asking.
They're dynamic characters that feel real. It's so easy to connect with them, not because they're a picture-perfect story of the perfect couple, but because they're flawed characters that have extreme but relatable struggles. The way this movie builds a connection with its characters is a masterclass in creative writing that I am not even remotely qualified to unpack. This connection allows the viewer to place themselves in the story. It allows the viewer to examine the love story of their own life. The film captures the soul of the relationship relationship between Almut and Tobias, and by extension captures the soul of every romantic relationship. It also allows the viewer to go on this emotional ride with the pair, which is what makes the story so compelling. So how does We Live in Time capture love, and what does it tell us to do with it? Early on, it shows the passions and struggles of a young relationship. The pair met at Tobias's lowest point and had an immediate, unspoken connection. When people talk about true love or soulmates, I don't think it comes down to one person. I think it comes down to finding a person who you connect with, who understands you implicitly somehow, without really having to speak any words. It's the kind of understanding that isn't easily explained by words. It doesn't mean that they don't fight or fail to communicate. It doesn't mean that they know the explicit details of each other's lives. It's the kind of feeling that words can't really describe, so we take to telling stories about it in an attempt to understand it. Carl Jung believed the people's personal unconscious mind and its connection to the collective unconscious mind could somehow be connected. He believed that if you lived truthfully to your conscious and unconscious mind, meaning that you had adequately confronted and integrated the dark parts of yourself, that you would naturally attract people that seem to share this connection with you, both in your friendship and in your romantic endeavors. It's as though the part of your mind that exists beyond the body connects with another human being and is finally at rest. This is what Tobias and Almut share. Their relationship isn't easy, it isn't perfect. They fight and things get challenging. This unspoken connection has to be cared for and nurtured. It's easy for your conscious sense of individuality to make mistakes, to miscommunicate, to lie and hurt the people that you share this connection with.
In what reality?
It means I'm not particularly interested in dying with fuck all to show for it.
Oh, okay. So we're not enough for you. Is that what it is?
To maintain it, you have to remember quickly to set everything aside, to be adaptable, forgiving, and willing to admit when you're wrong. When you find something so special, the only thing that matters is recognizing it for what it is and cherishing the time that you get with it. Because eventually, the next tragedy is coming. And that's what this film captures so well. An interesting and somewhat difficult to understand part of the story is Almut's competitive nature and her decision to compete for the Baku's door when she's also battling cancer. This decision is the primary conflict of the film. It's a choice Almut makes to live a fulfilled life before the end of her life. She accepts treatment but doesn't give in to not living. She doesn't surrender to her situation. She's living to give her daughter something to remember her by, something inspirational. Almut herself is left with the painful memory of her own father's illness and death. This kind of prolonged illness leaves a hole, a void in your memory where the person's illness is all that you can remember. For Almut, this memory ends her skating career. But what does all this have to do with the larger plot? At some points, it almost feels like it's an unrelated side story. Well, first, Almut competing for the Baku's door gives her something to give up in the final weeks of her life. She surrenders the competition and eventually decides that she'd rather spend the time with her family. It seems to me there's a moment when Almut realizes that the end is coming, that she is going to die, and that she'd rather spend the rest of this time with her family. When she does quit and returns to her family, she symbolically returns to her father as well by taking her family skating. The competition also plays a role in the tragedy of the film. As a child, Almut faced the tragedy of her father's illness by competing. She achieved something at the highest level and then lost her father and gave it up. It's her competitive spirit that drives her to live fully in the face of battling cancer, but it's in giving up that she's able to accept what's to come. Competing was a coping mechanism, a way to escape, but when she struggles to keep a steady hand under pressure, she's faced with her own death. In this moment, she realizes what's important to her, and she decides to spend her last weeks with her family. She takes them skating and symbolically unites them with her father. So we talked in some detail about love, but what about tragedy? The movie looks at this like two sides of the same coin. In order to love somebody, we have to open ourselves to the possibility that we may lose them. Failing to do this makes your love pathological. You become so afraid of losing them that you find subtle or not so subtle ways to keep the object of your love from leaving. Parents do this by smothering their children so they never develop any real skills, or beating them down so they're too afraid to leave. Partners do this by isolating you and smothering you so that either you rely on them or they rely on you entirely. There's a lot of truth in the saying, if you love somebody, let them go. Because if you're not prepared to let them go, you can't love them properly. And the world will eventually force you to let them go anyway. Without love, life loses its meaning. And with love, life is a tragedy. So all you can do is keep pushing, keep fighting, prepare yourself for the incoming tragedy, and cherish the time that you have with the people who matter most. That's the answer to life in its simplest form. It can be hard to see this when things are difficult, when you're feeling nihilistic and alone. But if you start to tell the truth to yourself and take the leap of faith that the force of good will win in the end, then this truth becomes self-evident, and you can properly prepare yourself for the difficult time to come. This movie is absolutely brilliant, and quickly moved itself into one of my top 5 of all time. Overall, I give it a 9.5 rating out of 10. It's a slice of life movie that feels like it captured life itself. It leaves the viewer with a sad but overall a positive message. Life is tragic, and love opens you up to that tragedy. If you allow yourself to be open to that, you will be hurt. The nature of life itself guarantees it. Suffering is a given, but it's worth it because if you're honest with yourself and you do your best to be your best, the highs will far outweigh the lows. And if you're lucky, you can participate in something divine and raise a child that's a slightly better version of yourself. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure you hit like and subscribe, and let me know what video you'd like to see next in the comments. Maybe check out another one of my videos. I just did one on Parasite.